I'm Basil Siakos, the Director of Programming for Doc NYC. Welcome to this Q&A for the film The Viewing Booth. I'm very pleased to have with me the film's director, Ra'anan Alexandrowicz, to answer some questions about the film. Welcome.
Hi, it's great to be here. I've been longing to play Doc NYC for a while. I'm kind of sorry that it's in this virtual mode, but I'm very happy to.
Me too. I wish we could be in person, but we adapt as necessary. So I want to start with some basic questions around sort of the premise of the film. So by design, the film is set up as an experiment. Can you talk a little bit about any kind of planning that went into setting up the site of the experiment as well as protocols? Did you consult with psychologists or anyone else to sort of design the kind of design how the experiment would run?
Yeah, so actually that's a really good, important point to address. The film is not an experiment. You're right to use both the words design and experiment, because in a way the design of the film evokes the idea of an experiment, but it's not a controlled experiment or an academic experiment. It didn't create any data. In a way, it's really finally it's very much like a case study of one specific dialogue between a specific viewer, Maya Levy, specific images, which are videos, online nonfiction videos depicting the Israeli occupation, and myself, a filmmaker who has a specific background with these issues. And so there was, and the background for it is actually quite a long development process over a few years, which started with myself sort of falling into certain doubts about how our nonfiction images, specifically the ones that I was trying to create that address Palestine and Israel and the occupation and all the political situation there, but and images of other people about those issues, and then in a wider way, nonfiction images that portray social justice issues or political issues in general. How are these images perceived by the people whom we want them to see? And I started trying to find a way to think about that and to portray that. And it was a long process of experimentation in the sense that I tried different approaches, different setups, different visual materials, different audiences. And this was about the 7th or 8th iteration of these etudes or exercises that took place at Temple University, where I was studying, in which I invited, and now I'm actually addressing your question. I invited, we put out an open call for people at Temple who have an interest in Israel, and who are willing to come and view materials and be filmed. And we set up the sets to film that thing. Again, it was not an experiment, and we clarified it with the people. This is not an experiment, but one last thing I'll say is that Maya Levy, who is the film is about Maya and the images. Maya actually did not respond to that open call, but while we were filming, we got a text from her saying, "I heard about this from someone who participated yesterday. It sounds very interesting. I'd like to do it as well." And we had someone else call and say, "I can't make it because I'm not feeling well." So we said, "If you can come at 8 p.m. tonight, we'll have a slot for you." And that's actually how Maya came, and she became the film in a way. So it's a mixture of a controlled, planned process and a very uncontrolled, unraveling of things, as happens in documentary.
Absolutely, and so that's curious. So you let people know in advance that it was going to be about the Middle East and about Israel and Palestine. It was just an open general call to the general student body. It wasn't geared specifically towards Jewish students or to students interested in Middle East specifically. It was just anybody who wanted to participate could participate.
No, it did. It definitely had a slant in the sense of the way that the words that I used were, "Are you interested in Israel?" And I went to speak at Jewish studies classes Middle East also, but it was definitely, I want to say fairly that the call was, I was hoping, and I published it through student organizations that are pro-Israel, like Hillel.
Mhm.
And so, because these are the people that interested me. So when this, as I told you, I had several iterations of this thing, but this one, the title that I gave it was The Meaning. And I said, let's ask people who, here are images of the occupation, images that mean a lot to me, that I know what they mean. I know the relationship between these images and reality. But I want to ask myself, what meaning will other people attribute to them? So definitely the people who interested me were people who were sympathizers, because for me, they are, what we call going beyond the choir.
Right.
And in a way, Maya was a distillation of that. And that's also the reason I decided afterwards to focus the film on her, because in the beginning I was editing sort of comparatively how do different people see scene. But at a certain point, I said to myself, here, there is an opportunity here. I am actually in conversation, or I actually have the opportunity to see how a viewer that I was making films for is viewing these images, because Maya is politically on a very different side than I am, but she's a sharp viewer, a critical viewer, a viewer who engages rather than turns images off. And I felt that this was a real opportunity for me to seek some answers for things that I've been thinking about for a while. So that's in a way why I focused the film on her.
Right, and so, I mean, that was going to be my question about sort of your decision to focus on Maya, but I'm curious, was Maya's involvement and the way that she reacted to the first session, did that inspire you going back to her, or were you always going to go back to certain students and have them watch themselves watching the films? Like, was that a new twist on it, or was that always going to be part of the process?
Yeah, it was definitely a new twist. So Maya, generally in the film, with the two parts of it, the first and the second, what I think is so phenomenal about Maya is that I think she reflects to all of us, or to many of us at least, many things about ourselves as viewers. As much as we might differ politically or I at least, on my approach to the reality that's in these images, I definitely felt that Maya was reflecting things to me also about how I am as a viewer. And her ability to just do it very candidly, sort of be there in the moment and just reflect it to us, that was something very special. I definitely didn't think that there would be this second part of inviting people. And I really had no concept that, as I said, this was also made with very limited resources. And I really didn't think that exercise was going to be a film. But suddenly, after I edited it and I saw Maya's, I edited something of an hour and a half of Maya speaking it was basically an hour and a half, which was almost the full engagement of the first session. And I felt there is a heart of a film here that I want to make. I didn't know yet how. And it took a while to come up with this idea that she would come back and watch more, and also watch herself watching the images. And I remember, this is a little anecdote, when I reached out to her and asked her if she would be willing to do this, she said, yes, it was very interesting. And sometimes when you speak your thoughts, you begin to reflect about them. And I was like, I told myself, oh, wow, it changed. Like, it changed her point of view. So I told her immediately, don't talk about it now. We'll talk about it when we record. But definitely one of the scenarios which I imagined as she was coming for the second meeting was to hear about how these images have maybe changed her point of view. Again, these sessions were very, like, every filmmaker has set their rules, maybe their general rules of how they make films, but even for each film, I guess the subject matter sort of forces you to create some rules for this film, for this production, especially a constructed film like this. So one of the things that Maya and I all our conversations in the film are what this was our connection. So she came to the first session, and then afterwards we maybe exchanged some words, but not anything substantial before she came to the second session. So, and then there were, she came a few times to see rough cuts of the film. We would talk specifically about that. It was only when the film was done and was to go to Doc Aviv that we actually met once to just really get to know each other outside of this booth situation. And that was very interesting for both of us to know something about, you know, each other outside of that very specific situation.
And so Maya comes back for the second session. Does it, like, the film suggests it does, but did it really surprise you how she sometimes walks back from the empathy suggested from the first watch and kind of doubles down on skepticism and doubts about the validity of what she's watching and about why certain things are framed and certain things are not framed? I mean, did that really surprise you? Like, you were expecting her to say, I have changed my opinion, you've convinced me that this is horrible and that I should change my mind about, you know, the occupation?
I was open to a few possibilities. And I think, you know, even different people watch, even the first part of the film, different people see in it different things. So in a way, what I see in it is that Maya is negotiating the images.
Right.
There's something about the images that kind of threatens her worldview, and therefore she finds different ways of trying to deal with that. Other people see it much more like that. Some people don't see the struggle, but only see her undermining the images. And some people only look at her and only see, and mainly see empathy. And I think that this was a challenge with this film, and it really also creates some division between audiences as to what do we see here, actually. So that's part of, and the Hebrew title of the film is Mirror, Mirror. So, and that's really part of what's happening here, that we, as Maya brings her who she is to negotiate the images, viewers bring themselves to the viewing booth to sort of negotiate what they see and how they deal with it. I was open to a few scenarios, and that's why it's also such an uncontrolled situation. And in the emotion of it, if you can call it that, because this is not a very emotional documentary, but in the emotional trajectory, the film, it's the first work that I did that is edited chronologically. So except for the 4 places where I mediate something, it's really that the time code is always like consecutive, because you couldn't really, the way that this thing happened, you couldn't really play with it and mix it up.
Right.
It was, and that is because it was so unexpected. So in the beginning, that's what I meant. That I was open to a few possibilities, and what happened is what happened. And when I decided to stop filming was really when I felt this is what it is. This is where she is. This final statement that she's saying, you know, this is not going to make me question my identity.
Right.
Face it, you know, that's where it got.
And a couple follow-ups to things that you've said already, which is obviously you were interested in sort of a very American perspective, a pro-Israeli American perspective here. But have you thought about, did you ever, in all the iterations of planning this, consider doing this project in Israel or elsewhere? And what do you think, like, how different would that experience have been, do you think, given that conceivably most Israelis are going to be very much aware of all of these kinds of videos and images that are part of the process of the film? You know, do you think it'd be very different, or do you think you'd get somewhat similar? Is there something uniquely American about the way that she is responding, or is it a uniquely pro-Israeli American viewpoint?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First of all, I did several iterations or a few iterations of this in Israel, but with different images, but with images that are images of the conflict, but with more of the kind of viral videos that go out on social media, which are more where it's more graphic violence. It's the stuff that, you know, creates our public perception of things. So it was these kinds of videos of the aftermath of certain attacks or counterattacks, but I've never done it with and other nonfiction images. I've done these things in Israel, but I've never used these images with Israeli audience. I want to say that for myself, Maya doesn't represent any group. For instance, American Jews, young American Jews, temple students. The one thing that she represents is what I said in the beginning, is she represents a viewer that I would have liked to reach as a nonfiction filmmaker.
Right.
And there are definitely viewers like that in Israel. There were many. There are viewers like that here. There are viewers like that in other places. But it's those viewers that I would hope that would see these images, and it would help them, or it would move them from one place to another. Because I think this is really a common goal for nonfiction filmmakers who are working in this sphere. It's not that this is all of what nonfiction is, or these are all. I don't want to be perceived as someone who's saying that all what nonfiction film should do is change minds and you know, advocate social justice or justice in general. But there's a considerable amount of work that's geared towards that. And Maya represents a viewer that I think many of these filmmakers would have wanted to reach and change. And
so following up to that, and it's sort of a two-part. So Maya attended Dr. Aviv with you and saw the film there, and if I'm saying that correctly, I saw it there for the first time myself, but I wasn't allowed to watch the Q&A. So what was sort of her response to watching herself being watched by others, I should say, and what was her interaction like with audiences? What was their perception of her participation in this and the viewpoints that she espouses in it, and how did she feel about that?
Yeah, Maya attended the screening in Dr. Aviv. Maya's mother attended the screening in Dr. Aviv. Maya's family in Israel. Some of the Palestinians would film these videos, and they met after the screening. It was a very highly, it was a highly charged event, but it was, as many times in this situation, was an event of conversation. I told Maya before Dr. Aviv, I told her, you know, we're going to screen the film in the bastion of the Israeli left. This is not, I don't know what people will think of me having made this film, sort of giving a platform for someone to deconstruct these images. Some people see it that way and criticize it. I don't know what people think of me. I don't know what people think of you. It might be difficult. The reactions might be difficult. And the interesting thing was to see the people lined up to talk to her. I think, you know, this is a film about a breakdown of communication, but in the process of it, it turns into some form of a dialogue, or it creates at least a space for people to start having this dialogue with Maya, or asking themselves if Maya reflects them. And it was interesting to see how many people wanted to talk to her, and they didn't want to, you know, they didn't want to convince her of anything. They just wanted to say to her that they managed to see themselves in her. So it was a strange moment, but yeah, satisfying one. But we know, you know, it's not really satisfying. This is the false satisfaction that these moments give us, because we know that interpersonal. You know that when people meet each other, they're able many times to communicate, even if they're very different. But I think the community that works with nonfiction towards that goal, we have to assume that we have a sort of mediation machine that is able to capture emotions in one place, encode them, transfer them to another place where they will be experienced as we want, and create dialogue. And then what the viewing booth does is actually question, not, I don't want the film to be perceived as I am saying that that doesn't happen. We have seen in the last century, you know, so now how images can create change and awareness, and what great political achievements have been made because people were able to see. But I just think that there is some sort of change in that, or we have to try to follow some sort of change in that, and really assess where our nonfiction, what is the nonfiction environment now, as opposed to maybe 20 years ago or 40 years ago. We have to be, I think, it would be good to be in dialogue with the people who are watching images, and sort of calibrate what images are doing, also by understanding viewers.
Absolutely. I think the film does it's a thought-provoking film, and I think that the reason it's generating these kinds of questions for me are the same kind of questions it's going to generate for audiences, because I do think you will find different elements to it. And it's not like Maya is a villain. It's not like you hate her, but it is this really fascinating exploration of trying to understand her own perspective and how it is being mediated through the experience of these images. So I think it's a really fascinating film, and I'm so very happy that you are allowing us to show it as part of Doc NYC. And we do have to wrap up, but I want to thank you so much, Ra'anan, for speaking with us about the viewing booth, and for, again, being part of the festival.
Thank you, Basil. Thank you for choosing the film and showing it to your audience. I'm thrilled that it's happening.